Welcome, everyone. I'm Peggy Collins of Bloomberg, and with us today is Reshma Saujani, who is the CEO and founder of Girls Who Code, and Betsey Stevenson, who is a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan. Before we start with what promises to be a very rich discussion about women in the economy, I thought we would first take a quick poll. And the poll should show up on your screen momentarily, and you should be able to input your answers. Basically, we're trying to figure out how many of you know a woman during the pandemic who either left the workforce entirely, who almost left the workforce because of stress and family obligations, or who lost a job during the pandemic entirely. And while we give you a chance to answer those questions, just a data point that a colleague of mine was pulling for us today. The number of women working is still down 5.5% since the beginning of the pandemic, just showing some of the gravity in terms of how women have shared a disproportionate burden in some ways during this pandemic. It actually came up earlier in a Fed hearing on Capitol Hill today. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell was testifying on Capitol Hill, and one of the first questions he got from senators in that hearing was about the number of women who have left the workforce. So certainly on the minds of lawmakers and certainly of our two esteemed panelists. So it looks like we've got a number of responses in already. So 63% of those listening right now know a woman who almost left the workforce during the pandemic. 63%, that's a huge number. 50% of you listening know a woman who lost a job entirely during the pandemic, and 31% know a woman who left the workforce during the pandemic voluntarily. So let me turn it over first to Reshma. So the title of this panel is actually a Marshall Plan for Moms. And that's a policy idea that you spearheaded, Reshma, and actually have some news on additionally today. Can you walk us through the policy recommendations that a Marshall Plan for Moms is calling on the Biden administration to put into effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the panel shows, as the poll shows, women are getting crushed in this pandemic. 2.4 million women have left, 4 times the rate of men. For every 3 mothers who have left the workforce, 1 father has. And we know that this is happening because of school closures and the uncertainty of school reopenings. And we know it's also happening is because many women found themselves in jobs that simply weren't pandemic proof. And so, they always say, never waste a good crisis. Well, we have an opportunity to have a 360 plan on how to get women back into the labor force, to build back our care structure and to build it back better than it was before. And, I think that includes basic, payments to mothers to support them, to put cash in their hands so that they can make choices. That includes paid leave and affordable daycare, 2 policies that Betsey knows we've been fighting for decades. It includes putting pressure on Main Street and Wall Street to retrain women and to offer policies that are going to support them so that they don't face the motherhood penalty. But we've been fighting these fights forever. And, we have an opportunity as we get out of this pandemic to, again, fix these structures once and for all. I'm really proud to support, to announce that, we've gotten the support of Craig Newmark from Craigslist to help us build this movement of support of $500,000 for the Marshall Plan for Moms. He is a long-term time advocate for women and women's organizations, including Girls Who Code. He sits on our board. So, this is basically women are rising up, men are rising up. We have an opportunity here to rebuild our country back better.
And Betsey, I know you've done a lot of research, not only on what this crisis has done to women, but also in comparison to where we're at the start of the crisis and other crises. What is your research showing about why this crisis in particular has hit women so hard?
So I think the starting place is to realize that this is our very first service sector-led recession. So in most recessions, the thing that gets hit hardest and first is the goods producing sector, making stuff. And that's very, very male dominated. So if you think back to the 2008 recession, only 20% of our jobs were in the goods producing sector, but 50% of the job loss was in that sector. we called it a man session back in 2008 because men lost their jobs in construction and manufacturing. And this is just very different. So we've never had a service sector-led recession before. And I think the reason for that is when we normally have a recession, people have less income and they respond by buying fewer durable goods. They don't respond as much by, say, not going to the doctor or not going even out to dinner or not going to the movies. But those are all things we've cut back in the pandemic. And if we think about things like education and health services, 78% of those jobs are held by women. And that got hit really hard in this pandemic. And actually, I remember the labor secretary once calling that that whole industry, recession proof, because we kept seeing growth in that sector during the 2008 recession, even in some of the worst months. It's not that it was recession proof. It's that that's just where our economy is going. Every day we become more of a service sector based economy. That's just how modern society is evolving. We've become much more productive in making stuff. So we need fewer people doing that. And we need more people doing things that are ideas based, and ideas are part of the service sector. So it's not just about necessarily the kinds of things you think of as service. A third of our exports are service, but it is very unusual for that to be an industry that gets walloped in a recession. And I think was the primary reason at the beginning women got walloped. And as they were starting to get on their feet in May, as businesses started trying to recall them to jobs, they realized they had no place to send their kids for the summer. The summer camps were closed. And so a lot of women felt that they couldn't go back, and they thought, well, maybe I can hold on till September. Well, then what happened in September is the school year that was supposed to come didn't really come. And we saw that really big dip between August and September in women leaving the labor force. And that was really concentrated in women who were slightly older. That's also really unusual. Sort of women in that 35 to 45 age range. Why were those the ones who sort of freaked out in September and was like, I just can't do this anymore? Well, something I think a lot of people don't appreciate is women have had more children than previous generations. They've actually been more likely to achieve their ideal fertility. There are fewer women who don't become moms. The moms are having more children than they did a generation before, but they're having them at much older ages. So we had all these 35 to 45-year-old women with younger children, more likely to be in the labor force than at any time in the past in terms of moms with young kids, and with more career experience, and then they just get walloped by the pandemic. So everything about this situation is unique, and hit women in a way we've just never seen before, because all of the conditions coming into the pandemic were unique.
Reshma, when you were talking about that this is an important time to take stock and also, not let this moment pass us by in terms of creating more support structures around working moms and families. As Betsey was saying, one of the things that really was exposed during the crisis was our childcare system and how fragile that was in terms of providing support for families. And then when it wasn't there, that they didn't have a lot of other options. What are some of your proposals around the childcare system specifically?
Yeah, I want to speak to what Betsey just talked about, because I was definitely one of those moms who got walloped. I am 45 years old and I have a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I found myself at the beginning of the pandemic with a newborn. I was supposed to be on maternity leave, but COVID happened and my nonprofit got hit. And my 5-year-old was now, at home for homeschool, and I had to log them on at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock. All the while I had to manage, over hundreds of people who were similarly facing the same constraints as I was facing, which is not a lot of child support, having a really tough job and having kids who really needed you. And I think many of us, at the beginning of the pandemic, we just kind of grinned and bared it. And then I think by the end, we are barely holding on. And I think that part of why we are barely holding on is because nobody asked us. I think we realized that America kind of disdains motherhood. When they closed the schools and they had some sort of 1950s expectation that there was somebody at home that was actually going to do it. And when they figured out what the cost of the HVAC equipment was and what we needed to do to support teachers, they never thought about us. They never put a value on our labor. And I think that for a lot of women, I'll speak for myself, that was traumatic. And so forget about even like the fact that we were third shift and going on food stamps and moving in with our parents and getting pushed out of the labor force. I think the mental toll of what has happened to us, over the past year has been huge. And so I think about my mother. I was one of the lucky ones, like I said. I have flexibility. I had some childcare support. But I think about my mother, who was a refugee. And when they came to this country, they couldn't afford childcare. I was a latchkey kid since I was like 8 or 9 years old. And so again, we are the infrastructure of childcare is broken. Nobody can afford it. And it's not seen as something that we simply need in our society, and that has to change. And so again, I think that the Biden administration and what it's doing to really bail out the childcare industry and offer, low-income parents a childcare tax credit is a start. I would argue that it's a down payment, on the Marshall Plan, but I think that we need to think bigger. And I think we have to think bigger, both from the federal government and from the private sector. Just like the private sector, it's in some ways made some really huge strides. I'll say in the tech industry where we work in terms of paid leave and paternity benefits. I want to see them lead the way too when it comes to childcare and offer full subsidies, for parents, because it is not affordable. And so I think that we, again, have an enormous opportunity here. Go ahead, Betsey.
Reshma, I was just going to say, I don't know if this actually, I don't know if this is actually a disagreement or nitpicking, but when you said America doesn't value motherhood, I thought it's that they don't value childhood. There's this, our entire federal policy system, we put our huge thumb on the scale to take care of people as they age. And we just think children belong to parents, and it's not our business as federal policymakers until they're old enough to vote. And if you think about that in terms of federal spending, where we spend our money, we spend it on older people, we spend it on adults, and we put very little into children. And so I don't know, maybe that's the disdain for motherhood, maybe it's the disdain for childhood, maybe these two things are so interlaced. But the one thing is absolutely, I agree with you 100%. I watched my in-laws, my sister-in-law navigate this whole crisis in Australia. And the very first thing that the government discussed is what will happen to the children. We can't just stop their education. We can't not provide them school. The focus was on the kids and making sure kids got to school, and then making sure like the kids of essential workers had a safe place to go. We didn't have that conversation. We treated it as if this is a personal problem for you to solve. And it's this fundamental idea in American society, which is you chose to have your rugrats, you take care of it. And it's time for us to start embracing the idea that kids belong to us as society. And those people we elect to Congress, they represent our children too.
That's right. And mothers are our heroes. I do think we disdain motherhood. I do think that that's why, in many ways, we're talking about what's happened to moms. Because again, if we focus on the pandemic, we cannot deny that mothers have been disparately affected in ways that fathers haven't. Even in 2-income households, right, where there's an cis family where there's a man and a woman, right? We still know that 75% of the unpaid, unseen work is done by women across the globe, right? And we don't value that work. Like I joke, even though we've been stuck in our homes with our partners, they've seen what we do. It's actually not even really unseen anymore. It is very seen. And nothing has actually changed. And so even when we think about the response, right, from government in terms, and I'll take what I can get. Even the response to the labor market, pushing out mothers and women from the labor market, 9 months, we lost 30 years of progress. The solution to that is talking about child poverty. It's not talking about what we've done to mothers and women. And that kind of scares me a little bit. And I do think it's uniquely American. As you pointed out, Germany, Estonia loves its moms. There are other countries around the globe who have, Sweden, right? K through 3, and it's you know, so it's not the same everywhere. But again, this might be a little wordsmithing, but I do think that what I've tried to do with the Marshall Plan for Moms is shine the light on moms. And it's been funny because I think it has gotten some pushback both on the right and the left, but for different reasons, in that focus on the word motherhood, even when the data is so clear. And it's fascinating.
Go ahead, Betsey.
So I think I think it's easy for me to, you know, the pushback, I think on the left, or I think this is the left. My concern is, you know, working decades for equality in the home. And I think equality in the home is the only real way forward. I agree with you that the reality is that we haven't achieved it. And I think that the pandemic showed how much we papered over inequality in the home by using outside services, relying on outside workers, relying on the teachers at our school, the aftercare programs, the being able to buy pre-prepared meals, bringing in house cleaning services, dropping off our laundry, whatever we had to do to ignore the fact that our spouses weren't doing their share. And then the pandemic hit and we couldn't ignore it anymore. I'm concerned we're going to see a huge wave of divorce. And so if we want to repair American families, we have to say, men, it's time to step up because women aren't going to take this anymore. So, you know, I worry about saying what we need to do is recognize how valuable the work women do is. I mean, yes, we want to see how valuable that is, but I don't want to stop there and say, okay, women are going to do that, so let's support them in doing it. I really want men to step up and do their share.
Yeah. Betsey, I want you to come to my house because you should hear me in the conversations I have with my wonderful husband, Nahal, who, look, in his mind, he does more than his father did, right? And, you know, he is one of that New York Times survey that said 86% of moms say that they're doing the homeschooling and 45% of dads saying that they're doing, both can't be true. And, you know, part of the problem that happened in my generation is not only we were sold a lie, meaning we thought that we had married these 50-50 partners. And then when we realized it wasn't true, we couldn't even tell the world about it. But because part of my generation was to pretend that there was something so different happening at the home. And I think that's also been a little bit what's creating this enormous amount of anxiety and like craziness. Because again, you are in my house, you see what I am doing and you still can't change. And I don't want to put the onus on women. I just have a thought. And again, I'm not an economist and we've never been here before. So I don't know what could happen. But what if when we start actually paying for unpaid labor and putting a value on it, that might actually be the solution to gender parity? And the example that I think about when I think about that is computer science. As you all may or may not know, the world's first programmer was a woman, Ada Lovelace. You know, the ENIAC women. Computer science, when it started, was an industry that was full of women. But then when it got more lucrative, when it got more respected, men pushed women out. And so what if housework became the respected, lucrative position? Maybe would that change it? Because the reason why I think men are watching us and not picking up the laundry and not logging our kids on for a Zoom call and not because it's not respected, it's not valued. And I don't know how to change that without valuing it.
So Reshma, does that mean you would support or actually paying women or paying men, someone in the family to stay home?
You know what I support? Big ideas. I support learning more. I support having those conversations and just not assuming that they're not going to work because we just don't know. And I think a lot of these conversations are happening across, as you know, in India right now, there's a huge movement there was back in the day, there's been a movement to have these types of conversations. I just think that we have to have them. And I did find it interesting that, that we are, passing a childcare tax credit that's not really a tax credit, to support parents and paying for childcare. And what's happening right now is that the unseen, unpaid work is what's causing women, to leave the workforce, a significant amount of them. And so how do we solve for that? Because as we know, the crisis isn't ending tomorrow. And I live here in New York City, they're talking about keeping the schools shut down in the fall. So what are we going to do? Because, we're not going to be at 1989 labor market participation. It's going to be worse.
So
So I just want to say we do actually know something. We do know something about what happens if we pay women or men to stay home. We know that women will be more likely to stay home. We know that it won't be men who stay home. It will be women. And we know that there will be fewer women in the workforce. We know that will disproportionately happen at the times of their careers that make it hard for them to get back in, and that this will leave women in a vulnerable place when they are, say, in their mid-50s. I think the real challenge, and how do we know this? We know this because families already face higher marginal tax rates on on secondary earners. And we can see the households that are on the margin. And as we change those tax rates, we see more or fewer women going in and out of the labor force. And we see how women get hurt when we put a thumb on the scale that encourages them to stay home. So I do have a ton of anxiety about that because it will lead to more inequality in the workplace. And it also leaves women in that vulnerable place as they get older. And this comes to a different point where I think Reshma and I are going to have now agreement, which is one major problem in our labor market is we have not created on-ramps to get back into work when you've taken an off-ramp to leave. There are plenty of off-ramps. I feel like our work life is like this game of chutes and ladders, and we fall into these chutes all the way down all the time, but there are hardly any ladders in our game. And so we have these women who it's all overwhelming, or they just had a kid, or they have a kid that, they have a kid who all of a sudden has a big health problem. They step out of the labor force for 2 years. And I've heard so many stories about women who just can't find their way back, or they come back at half the pay and they're never able to work back to where they were before. And we have got to solve that problem. We can't have women with 10 years of work experience and advanced degrees just disappear from the labor market. And I also don't want to see women who have less education find that they're stuck in dead-end minimum wage jobs forever because of time in and out of the labor force. So we've got to find ways, we've got to build the ladders so that this game of chutes and ladders we play allows us to get back up to the top if we have to take one of the chutes down.
And I want to be clear, the Marshall Plan for Moms is not arguing for women to get paid to stay at home. Because I actually think that if you put cash in their hands right now, they'll choose to go to work. The choices are coming from the fact that we're being pushed out and we're not given choices. And I think, again, if you talk to Black and Latino women, they need to have cash in their hand to basically pay for food, pay for childcare, right? Not have to work that third, fourth shift. And I think that's important because I also do believe, and I am one of them, women have dreams, passions. They want to work. You know what I mean? That is like the American dream. And I think that they're not being allowed to have those choices right now. And so I am happy that that we are hopefully going to pass, the childcare tax credit and start putting money into the hands of parents because we need to. But I 100% agree with Betsey. And I think that we have to pay attention to this issue, especially right now, because I think when women go back to work, the motherhood penalty is going to be even steeper. Because now you saw my life on Zoom. You saw my 5-year-old, you saw my 1-year-old, you saw everything that's happening. And are you seeing that and saying, gosh, I got to hire a mom? Absolutely not, right? You're seeing that and be like, where's that single guy that I want to hire? So we have got to pay attention to this. We have to hold companies accountable for this. And I think that is, again, why I'm arguing for Marshall Plan, because I want KPIs. I want to know, okay, Google, how many women have left your workforce? Okay, Target, Walmart, every single one of you. How many have you gotten back? And what are you putting into place to make sure that you can actually bring them back, whether that's retraining, whether that's flexibility, whether that's rooting out the motherhood penalty, because we know we already faced one before.
Well, that's
so interesting. Peggy, I just wanted to be clear about what I mean by the incentives or disincentives to work. Look, I think giving people cash, I think I agree with you, particularly for people who are struggling. It actually can increase their ability to work. It gives them more flexibility. It can give them a little bit of breathing room. The problem is actually when you take that cash away because they take a job. So you take a job and you end up financially no better off from working, or even you end up financially worse off from working. And that's when people get trapped into these kinds of positions. So I'm not worried about giving cash to lower income, moderate income moms. I completely agree with that. I'm worried about plans to take it away once they enter the labor force. And so how do we think about letting people keep the financial assistance we give them without penalizing them the second they go back to work?
Yeah.
Sorry, Peggy.
And that's Congressman Jayapal calls it like survivor checks instead of stimulus checks.
Well, we actually are getting some questions from the audience already, given the discussion that you both have been having. And one of them is directly to this issue of off-ramps and on-ramps. So question from the audience for both of you. Can you talk more about what the on-ramps should actually look like, given that so many people have, and women in particular, have left the workforce? How do we bring working mothers back into the workforce once the pandemic recedes, and what kind of supports do they need going forward?
So, there was a big push to do returnships. Many companies had basically experimented with this, right, Betsey, before, and it was a way of basically calling in women who had left and saying, okay, your position is now, is reopened, come back and we'll give you the retraining that you need to basically come back into the place that you had actually left. And so I think that those were really effective. And so I think, having more of those, I think is really important. I think secondly, flexibility is going to be huge. I tease that before the pandemic, I saw my kids 2 hours a day. Now I see them way too much. I want something in the middle, right? So we want to offer women some flexibility, when they return, so they don't feel like they have to choose between their career and their children. Quite frankly, we should be offering parents that, because hopefully this experience has also changed the way that fathers interact with their children. And I do think that a lot of women in this moment are facing discrimination, whether it's not getting that promotion, whether it's getting outright fired, because they're caretakers. And so I think, again, having policies to kind of root that out is really important.
So a lot of our federal job training programs and job search assistance programs are really focused on people who are the hardest to place into jobs. They don't have a ton of skills. And then there's a huge gap for people who have some work experience but have taken some time out. Who is going to help them figure out how to refresh their skills and how to get them placed into jobs? So one thing would be for our federal programs to expand how they see the world. The other thing is for every college and university who has a job placement office should be focused as much on their alumni as on their current students. That is a service that you should be able to go back to your college and say, or your graduate program or whatever, and say, I've taken 3 or 4 years off. I need some help getting back in. Can you help me with my resume? Can you give me some suggestions? Can you set me up with interviews the same way they do for a college senior? Reshma mentioned these returnships. They've been very effective. Companies that say, look, you've been out for 3 years. We're going to match you with a mentor inside the company who's going to try to help you get back up to speed. So specific programs that bring people on. What a lot of companies found is that people were burning out and leaving. And so some companies have been forced to do these returnships because they lost a lot of really skilled people and they want those people to come back. So they're trying, if you're a big company, it's easy to say, we've got to wait for you to get back in. For smaller companies, I think we need more federal programs. We need colleges playing a role. We need to think about not looking at a gap on someone's resume as a character flaw. It's not a character flaw that you took care of your dying mother. It's not a character flaw that you took care of your child in the first year. It is a sign that you are actually a committed and loyal person who will be committed and loyal to the company once you start working.
Yeah, and I love that. And one of the things that I think it's really is an important opportunity is that we've seen that technology has automated so many jobs. And President Obama used to always say, the last jobs to go will be the humans who are telling the computers what to do. We at Girls Who Code have taught over 300,000 girls to code. I've also wanted to teach their mothers and their parents. And so we do really have an opportunity to work with community colleges, to work with universities and to work with companies in the area to say, what are the needs that you need? What are the skills that you want workers to have? And to really have highly effective, retraining programs to get parents back to work and put them in, good wage jobs so they can march to the middle class.
Another question from the audience. will there be COVID aftershocks with regard to future birth rates? I am childbearing age, but witnessing moms struggle now. I'm questioning future motherhood.
That question breaks my heart.
We're both like,
I know at Bloomberg, we've done some reporting on this in the past year, where at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought that potentially we'd see, more families pregnant and the birth rates would go up. But so far, the data that's coming in is showing the opposite direction. Betsey, have you seen any of this in your studies or research?
Yeah. So look, one thing we have to keep in mind, this is an awkward discussion, but 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. Some of them are unplanned with someone you don't know very well. And we basically shut all that down with the pandemic. So we have to sort of dig into the data to see how planned pregnancies were affected. And I haven't seen that yet, but we've definitely seen a decline in fertility. I do think a lot of people have been worried that this looks really hard. So I'm just going to say out loud that my children are the greatest joy in my life, and I wouldn't take back a second of it. And I even though I think, Reshma, I'm just going to tell you that the honesty with which you said our generation pretended there was equality in the home, and that's getting harder and harder by the minute to pretend, and that's creating a lot of the stress. That's exactly my life too. And I think my hope, I take a very optimistic look from that, which is that we're going to have better, more honest conversations with men. And what I hope you do is that you have children, but you have those honest conversations ahead of time. In my household, just yesterday, my partner said to me, I put away the laundry. And then I went in the laundry room and he had put away his laundry and left me the children's, my own, and all the linen. But hey, he put away his. So we need to just have those conversations. And maybe you say, you're going to do half of the kids' laundry too when we're splitting things 50-50. But really, don't skip it, because children are a joy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I went through a decade of a ton of fertility struggles to have those two babies that I loved my life. But I do think that, and I think the good news from this is so many of us are so focused on this as activists, as economists, right? And making sure that we build back our structures better. So for those of you who are listening that never got really excited to go march for paid leave, please do. Get fired up about affordable daycare, right? Get fired up about paid leave the same way so many of us have been marching and protesting, over the past 4 years. We have to fight for what we want. We have a huge opportunity here. There's an enormous amount of populist mom rage. We're angry. And let's do something with that anger. And I know probably Betsey, I'm going to speak for you, but from our perspective, that's why we're here. Because we want to keep using our voices to change things for the better for you and for all of us. And so don't opt out. Don't say it looks too hard, I don't want to do it. Actually, let's fight, to build it back better.
I agree.
Another question that came in is, can women and families afford not to go back to work? What does not going back to work do to families' income?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of the women who dropped out of the labor force are lower income women, and they are going to have to go back to work. I'm not worried that they're going to sit around not working. But, for a lot of them, they just didn't have a childcare opportunity. There is, if you've got an 8-year-old who's being homeschooled and you're the only parent available, there's nothing you can do. You can't leave them at home alone. So I think this is one reason why these families are struggling, why we're seeing such long lines at food banks. And I think when they can go back to work, they will. But I don't think that means hey, the problem's solved. And I heard, I did an interview where they interviewed this woman who really spoke to me, because she talked about working her way up from minimum wage to $15 an hour, and how much easier her life was once she was up to $15 an hour. And the thing is, she and I both know that she's not going back at $15 an hour when she gets a job back. She's going to drop. She's going down one of those chutes. And so, yes, they can't afford, but the real problem is they're going to go back and it's going to take them years to climb back to the wages they had before. And this is across the income distribution.
So in terms of what could be some of the long-lasting impacts of this many women dropping out of the workforce during this time period, what do you think some of the long-lasting impacts could be?
I mean, one, I think we have an opportunity to really get these policies passed once and for all, paid leave, and affordable daycare. I mean, I think there's a lot of incredible activists, National Domestic Workers Alliance, paid leave for all, who have been working on this issue tirelessly for so long, and I think it's time. And I think that there's an opportunity, as moms are angry, as you're feeling that rage, again, I'm not kidding. We need to march for those things. We need to protest for those things. We need to donate to those causes. We need to call our legislators. We have an opportunity here, and we need to take that opportunity. I think the second thing is we almost have a second shot at rebuilding the workforce. Dr. Mason said this to me, and she was so spot on. She said, when millennials were coming to the workforce, everybody said, "Where's the beanbags? Where's the popcorn?" We built the workforce for them, but nobody did that for moms, right? We were still breastfeeding in closets and, hiding the pictures of our children on our desk and pretending that we didn't have to go to that doctor's appointment and apologizing for our children and our needs. And now there's no need to do that. I always tell women, when your kid comes into your Zoom screen, don't turn off your video, leave it on. Let them yell. You know what I mean? Let it change we have an opportunity. We have to change culture, and we have to demand the things that we need to thrive and survive, not just to survive, but to thrive. And I think that we have an opportunity to do those things. And I think we also have an opportunity to have a conversation about what are the other things that we may need. Like you said, permanent cash payments, right, to support, families. We are living in a very different world. We've never seen or experienced anything like this before. So for me, I don't want to pick for scraps. I want all of it. I want to basically name all the things that we could do, we could have, right, to successfully, again, thrive as parents, thrive as mothers, and to ask for those things and to demand those things and to fight for those things.
Well, we actually have a question from the audience from a dad. I'm a father to a 4-year-old and a business owner. I really care about this topic and I'd like to continue this conversation. So as a father and a business owner, what are good avenues to do so?
I can jump in. So I think Betsey, right? I mean, I feel like a lot of the pushback against paid leave is, I think Congress is afraid of business. So I think the more business owners that you have talking about paid leave and affordable daycare and saying that that's important, and it's important for society, it's important for innovation, it's important for our workforce, I think is really important. I think it also, as Betsey mentioned, this is a cultural conversation we have to have with dads and with men, who need to be supporting and caretaking, 50-50. I like kind of 60-40 personally, but, I think that there's an opportunity for you as men to acknowledge what women are doing. That study where 45% of dads thought that they were doing the homeschooling when we know that that's not true bothered me, right? Because again, I think it goes back to this Instagram culture where we have to pretend that the world is some way that it's not, just because we want, and men are doing this because they want people to like them. We changed what fatherhood looked like. We had all those Gillette ads and dads are great and look at me, but it wasn't true. It wasn't real. And so I think we got to tell the truth, and dads got to tell the truth to themselves too.
I think that there's a couple things that I agree with all of that. And I'd say, let me just comment on the business owner part. It is absolutely the case that you've got to have business owners leading the way to say, our business will survive if there's paid sick leave. Our business will survive if there's a national paid leave plan. You know what? You already, for many people, need to give unpaid leave. What do you care if we get a national paid leave plan? In fact, that will make your employees better off. But we need you to lead that conversation because, as Reshma said, the pushback is businesses don't want this. I also want to see dads have got to start talking to each other about the importance of fatherhood and what it means to be an active dad. So there were a couple things that we did in my household that really changed things that didn't get me to 50-50, but I think got me closer to 60-40 than we would have been without it. And one is that I literally never changed a diaper. We were like, that's going to be my husband's job. I do inputs, he does the outputs. And we found a way to make a division that meant that he had a full responsibility from the very, very beginning. And that can actually be really important for breastfeeding families, because often it looks like, oh, mom's doing everything because mom's got the milk. There's nothing I can do. Well, I was completely incompetent on diaper changing. I wasn't, it was his thing, but it gave him this really important role. So I think that is really important. Look, I wanted to actually comment a little bit on this sort of permanent effect, the previous question, which is just because there are what's going to happen permanently in society. And I think that what's happened is ever since the 1970s, when women started entering the labor force in much higher numbers, we had decided childcare was a personal problem to hide in the background. And Reshma talked a lot about that. It's time to stop hiding it. And in order to actually adapt our workforces to recognize that all parents work in the labor force, we have to recognize that there are parents in the workforce. So we got to change our vision. I think that's my optimistic thing. I think that's happening here. I also think that we're going to see women's labor force participation numbers recover, but I don't want us to miss the fact that some women are going to be permanently hurt, and we're going to have to take special action to help those. The ones who took time out, the ones who lost jobs, the ones who are failing to find their way back in, those women are going to never quite recover. They're never going to quite have the retirement savings. They're never going to have this be on the same earnings trajectory unless we take very specific action to help those individuals. And I don't want us to lose sight of it just because things start getting better for us as a collective. I don't want us to leave any women behind. And so we're going to really need to think about the women who got hurt during the pandemic and the policies we need to bring all the women with us through this recovery.
Well, Betsey, we're coming up on almost the end of our time right now. So one quick lightning round question. Yes or no, would an increase in the minimum wage have a larger impact on mothers than other groups? Reshma, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
So that is definitely one area where you both agree. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly rich discussion about how we can build a better support network for working mothers, working families, and ways to get women who have shared more of the burden in this crisis in many ways back into the workforce as we go forward, not only just in the days right after the pandemic recedes, but for years ahead. So thank you to the audience for listening and submitting your questions and responding to the poll, and to Reshma and Betsey, thank you so much for your work and for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsey. Thank you, Peggy. It was great talking to you.
You too. Stay well.
Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, Peggy.